Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting emerging Revolutionary War revelry this evening. I'm Dan Welch, and we're going to get into another one of those 250th anniversary events with Patrick Hannum in just a moment. We had Patrick on with us several weeks ago as he talked about the events leading up to and the Battle of Great Bridge on December 9th, 1775. And we spent some time with Patrick down there on site for the 250th event that was held at Great Bridge. It was a great day. But we're going to talk a little bit today about the events that would take place after the battle and lead up to another important moment in 1775 and into 1776, and that would be the burning of Norfolk. Before we get into that, however, I want to remind you, as I always do, to continue to follow us on our blog. We've got lots of posts going up daily at emergingrevolutionarywar.org detailing some of the many events that were taking place 250 years ago. Also on the blog, you'll find information about our 2026 bus tour. We hope you will join us. We are in the throes of planning some really outstanding and exclusive locations and stories for you. The bus tour continues to be a popular engagement for all of you, our listeners and our followers and readers, each and every fall. And we're looking forward to having just another great time immersing ourselves in the history of the Revolutionary War coming up in the fall of 2026. So if you'd like to join us on our annual bus tour, make sure you also head over to the blog, emergingrevolutionarywar.org, to find out more information about that. Last but not least, you can always find our full host of videos, past and present, on our YouTube channel, as well as our live videos from all of these 250th activities on our Facebook page and other social media outlets. So with that, I want to make sure we give our speaker tonight enough time to sufficiently immerse us in these events of 250 years ago. So please welcome back to Emerging Revolutionary War Revelry, Patrick Hannum. Patrick, great to have you this evening.
Well, Dan, it's great to be back. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity again.
We are, had such a great time catching up with you at the event down there, the 250th event down at Great Bridge, and we've had some discussions, about the significance of not only what happens December 9th, 1775, but in the weeks after in that region. And so we wanted to continue to cover that story this evening with you and pick up following the Battle of Great Bridge, the outcome, the reactions of that engagement and the Patriot victory there, and the events that will push forward into the early part of 1776 and the burning of Norfolk. So what can you tell us as the battle comes to a conclusion on December 9th? You can set the stage for us as we charge forward into the new year, both in 2026 and 250 years ago, 1776.
Well, that's a lot to cover here, but we'll try to do this as efficiently as possible. So immediately after the battle on the 9th, Woodford wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. The intelligence was not that great. There was information that there were Highlanders in Norfolk. Well, it was true. There were Highlanders in Norfolk. They weren't soldiers. They were civilians. They had come into Norfolk Harbor, and their intent was to get down to North Carolina, up the to Cross Creek, basically the large Scottish settlement there, north of Wilmington, and so Woodford thought, they were soldiers, and he thought they would be up next, and so they were still hunkered down. But turns out that what Dunmore had tried to do was induce those folks, the males in that group, they were family units, to try to join his militia, and he actually conscripted some of them into his militia. So the information Woodford had was somewhat accurate, and so he wasn't going to just charge across the bridge, and so during that evening of the 9th, the British evacuated, the British and loyalists. Eventually, there's various numbers of casualties. We believe the regular casualties were 60 to 62, and maybe up to 64 from one account. And the loyalists and the other loyalists with him, of course, the white loyalists and the black loyalists that were there, suffered probably another 40 or more casualties. So about 100 casualties, and that was significant. And so they abandoned the fort. And on the morning of the 10th, we have a statement from a young officer. His name is Samuel Templeman, and he says that he and a Captain Goodman from North Carolina were the first two in the fort that morning. Woodford initially was still, cautious. The bridge, about 8 miles to the west of Norfolk, or to the west of Great Bridge, had been burned or had been cut as it was. It was sabotaged by loyalists, they determined, loyalist partisans in his rear. And so he had to wait for that to be rebuilt. Additionally, he had requested reinforcements from Patrick Henry's 1st Virginia Regiment, which was over in Williamsburg. And the Committee of Safety had authorized 3 companies to come over and reinforce him. So they were en route about the time the battle takes place. They were crossing the James River. One of those companies went up near Richmond to a supply depot and and obtained 500 pounds of lead plus gunpowder. So they had more military supplies with them, and Woodford knew all this was going on. Additionally, North Carolina had offered the 2nd North Carolina Regiment with Colonel Howe in command, and they were en route as well. So all this was on Woodford's mind. So he wasn't going to go originally just charging across that bridge. He needed to get his logistics chain established. Once those were all underway, Woodford did send a light unit under Lieutenant Colonel Edward Stevens to Kemp's Landing, and he arrived there on about midnight on the 11th of December. And one of the first things they start doing is interviewing to figure out who were those collaborators that were supporting the
Mm.
Dunmore.
Mm.
They start identifying people. On the 12th, the 3 companies from the 1st Virginia Regiment under Francis Epps, the lieutenant colonel or the major of that organization, do arrive. And same time, Colonel Howe's unit, the 2nd North Carolina, arrives. Um, there's no specific research on this, but I believe there were probably 8 companies of Howe's regiment. The 2 probably stayed in North Carolina, and with those 3 companies of the 2nd Virginia, now you've doubled the number of companies that Woodford has. And he has to feed and supply these guys, and his supply line is not complete. So that's one of the reasons for delaying a little bit moving to Norfolk. But I believe Howe will actually go into Norfolk first on the 13th, and then Woodford will follow with the main body on the 14th. Um, there's a little bit of firing, nothing significant, a few people wounded. It could have been friendly fire, we're not really sure. But by that point, Dunmore and all his forces have evacuated Norfolk, and they're on ships in Norfolk Harbor. And a large number of loyalist civilians don't want to be in the city, and they join this massive flotilla. That numbers in some estimates 100 vessels.
Wow.
And later in February, when Captain Hammond comes in, he actually describes some of those as rafts, that people
Mm.
living on rafts out there in the water. So the conditions are really not very good for a lot of these people that evacuate. But the Patriots do occupy the city. And of course, they've got riflemen. And when people appear on deck, they'll take a few shots now and then. Um, at one point, there are some cannon rounds shot into Norfolk to quiet the riflemen that are firing at the ships. But it's an uneasy truce, if you will, between those on the ships and those ashore for about 2 full weeks. During that period, Woodford and Howe will both write to Edmund Pendleton, the president of the Committee of Safety in Williamsburg, that we need to make a decision here. Um, this place, we can't hold it, and so when they do that, they give the convention a conundrum, right? What are we going to do with Norfolk? Are
Right.
we going to destroy it? Are we going to try to hold it? And this debate goes on all the way through the middle of January. Now, if you read Andrew Lawler's book, A Perfect Frenzy, what you'll find is he's come to the conclusion that orders were given to destroy Norfolk. I'm not as convinced of that. I'm not sure that there weren't some orders given to destroy some of the critical infrastructure that would allow the Navy to be based out of Norfolk and supply the forces that were there in the harbor to prevent them from establishing a Navy base. I'm not convinced that a complete destruction of the city was ever authorized. So my general conclusion is that Woodford and Howe were the two that wanted the city destroyed for military
Mm,
purposes because they knew it could not be held. Without a navy, without control of the water, you cannot hold the city of Norfolk. Now, you can look at it today. Norfolk is this is the largest naval base
okay.
in the world today, Norfolk Naval Base. The shipyard that they destroyed over in Portsmouth, uh, the Gosport shipyard, is today the government shipyard, the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. This is the only place in the country where we build nuclear powered vessels.
Mm,
Um, so it's one of the third, it's the third largest container port on the east coast of the United States. Baltimore, up at the head of the Chesapeake Bay, is the handles the largest numbers of roll on, roll off um, cargo, like automobiles and heavy equipment in the United States, more than any West Coast port. The area is very, very strategic today. Virginia, I think, has the third largest number of military personnel stationed here in the United States today, second only to California and Texas. So talk about strategic importance today. It was strategically important in 1775. And
right.
so Norfolk is absolutely a critical place. So what do you do with it? And I think that's the conundrum that faces the political leadership. So ultimately, what will happen is that decision will be made by Dunmore once he fires on the waterfront. And whatever the circumstances, the troops themselves will then begin to torch the rest of the city. With that, there's no question that that's what happened. But who gave those orders? Or were there even orders given? You know,
Mm,
was it just let them go? Were they encouraged to do it? We don't really know. Uh, there are points in there where citizens have there was investigation that was done in 1777 by the legislature of Virginia then, and now it's a state. And those were done in September and October. So we're talking nearly 2 years after the event. And they took depositions from at least 20 different citizens who describe what transpired. And there's no question that the troops were burning the city. Um, Now, there's one indication in there that Major Francis Epps, who was that officer that came over with those three companies of the detachment of the 1st Virginia Regiment, and he says to one citizen, "We got orders to burn the city." Well,
mm,
that may have actually been when they were burning the distillery. And they would obviously that would be a critical piece of military infrastructure because they didn't want them to be able to get that liquor,
right.
because it's a very important part of the ration of sailors and soldiers.
The British
So
Navy. Yeah.
yeah. So that becomes a question in my mind is what instructions were actually given? Was it with the critical infrastructure? You know, so eventually though the town will be destroyed. It's the opening salvo is from the three major warships that were out there. The Otter and the Kingfisher, they both would have had 6-pound guns on them. Dunmore had created a Virginia colonial navy, if you will, and some of those ships were armed with 4 and 6-pound guns. I think was the biggest thing they probably had on them. But they could throw some cannonballs into town as well and destroy that waterfront area. There's an additional ship that came in on the 21st of December was the HMS Liverpool, Captain Blue, and he would become then the squadron commander of those three British warships because he was the senior man. Blue escorted in a supply ship by the name of Maria, and they had 2,000 or 3,000 stands of arms. And this is what the ministry had sent to Dunmore. And if this had arrived prior to Great Bridge and prior to the occupation of Norfolk, the
Different
whole
outcome.
yes, a whole
Yeah.
different outcome might have come out of this, but it was a little too late to affect what happened on the ground. And so Liverpool, um, Otter, and Kingfisher would all remain there through the middle of February. Um, Late, like say mid-January, the decision was made to burn the rest of the city. About two-thirds of it burned, probably between the 1st and the 4th or 5th of January. Woodford says 9/10 of it burned in one letter, but
Mm.
it was really, the investigation reveals, about two-thirds of the city burned.
Wow.
The remaining one-third was then ordered by the convention to be destroyed. And that happens by about the 5th or 6th of February. They burn the rest of the city, and they burn the Gosport shipyard over in Portsmouth as well, although they don't destroy many homes or buildings in Portsmouth proper, but the shipyard is destroyed. So that all occurs on about the 9th or so of February. Woodford and Howe now will evacuate Norfolk. I don't believe Woodford was actually there. I believe he had actually turned command over to his second in command, Lieutenant Colonel Scott, and Woodford had taken leave because Howe is senior to him and he's the overall commander. So it makes a lot of sense not to have the two colonels there and to have the lieutenant colonel in charge of the Second Virginia. So they'll evacuate, they'll backtrack back to Kemp's Landing, back to uh, Great Bridge, and then around that northern end of the Great Dismal Swamp, and establish their headquarters by the 14th or 15th of February over at Suffolk. Now, about the same time that this happens, um, Roebuck will come in, Captain Hammond, and he looks around, and everybody's very sickly that's on these vessels out there. And he says, we've got to get people ashore. So under the cover of those guns, they go ashore over at what's called Hospital Point, um, today, where the Norfolk Naval Hospital is in Portsmouth. It was then called Tucker's Point, and they dig in. And so they have a beachhead, if you will, over there at Portsmouth. Um, Shortly, or just about at the same time that happens, Henry Clinton will show up on the HMS Mercury, and he will have several transports with him, a couple companies, I believe, from the 4th and maybe the 44th regiments, light infantry companies with him. So the idea that the British are going to reinforce the area, you know, that's actually come to fruition,
Yeah.
and I think it's something that needs to be considered when why did the Patriots decide to destroy Norfolk? Well, the area could be reinforced, and Howe and Woodford thought, it could probably Norfolk could probably handle 5,000, a garrison of 5,000 soldiers. Well, if you talk about 5,000 soldiers, now we're talking about Yorktown all over again in
Yeah.
1775. Now, the British strategy did not call for that. Henry Clinton did not stay. He went on down to North Carolina, and then eventually, linked up with Peter Parker at Charleston. But the option was there, and the Patriots did not know what instructions the British had, and whether they would be coming to Norfolk. So I think in retrospect, when you look at it today, it was definitely a military necessity to burn the town of Norfolk, to burn the city, as painful as it was. And to support that, well, in a couple things I've found that aren't highlighted, I don't think, in any other work that's out there. Um, there was an officer on the Liverpool when they came in. And they actually arrived in Norfolk on the 21st or 22nd of December. And the officer says, the day before we got here, Dunmore was contemplating burning Norfolk.
Hmm.
But when we arrived, he decided not to. Very interesting statement,
Yeah.
and that's in the NDAR, Naval Documents, the American Revolution. I believe it's volume 3. And I've ran across this other letter, and I kind of want to read this because I think it's enlightening. And this was from the president of the Committee of Safety, Edmund Pendleton, to William Woodford, and it's dated Williamsburg, January 16th, 1776. And he says, while the town of Norfolk was entire, I could not think it right for you to abandon it, as it was too shocking to think of our making a conflagration of our own town, though too much of the property of our enemies. But after Lord Dunmore had done that horrid work, fit only for him, I saw no reason for your stay. And yet a determination has been put off from time to time by our slow-moving body till yesterday, when a resolution passed that you should evacuate as soon as it was judged necessary or prudent by a council of field officers. A resolution for demolishing the remaining buildings in town and suburbs was rejected, but I am inclined to think it will pass today, as they did not see the propriety of leaving such comfortable lodgings to our enemy. So this to me tells me there was still a debate on the political side as to what are we going to do with Norfolk, even up
Yeah.
through the middle of January. So timing is really the issue on all these decisions and what kind of guidance was provided to the military commanders.
I
Um,
mean, that's prime winter quarters for the British and the Loyalists.
Absolutely. And again, these are the same conundrums that the Patriots face with Boston, New York, Charleston. These are
Exactly.
repeated over and over again. I think the difference here from a broader strategic perspective, um, when it comes to Norfolk, is this is early in the war.
Yeah.
And if if Virginia does not provide both forces and supplies to the Continental Army, the revolution will fail. There's no question. The
Right.
political leadership. And so by destroying Norfolk, that allows a whole series of things to occur from a strategic perspective in terms of resourcing Washington's army. And
Yeah.
the example I like to give on that is that 20% of the men that crossed the Delaware River with Washington in Christmas Day 1776 were Virginians. All of those units were involved in ejecting Dunmore finally up at Gwen's Island, every one of them. And so had the British retained even a small foothold here in Virginia, in this Tidewater area of Virginia, which could easily be reinforced by the British Navy, that had the resources, the capability, the mobility to do that, um, then the revolution would look very different than it did. So
Oh,
that's my conclusion.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you deny the British of this logistical um, base. They shift their concentration elsewhere. You mentioned the Roebuck. The Roebuck heads up to New York in July and August of 1776 and supports the New York campaign of the House up there. You're shifting that military theater of operations from the Tidewater area up to New England, up to New York, and now that provides Virginia the opportunity to not only send its military might units, as you mentioned, to other theaters of this war, but also those natural resources that would have been molested otherwise if Norfolk stands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got some maps. I just kind of want to
Sure.
throw those up there, Dan, if I
Yep.
could, and we'll share those with you. And the reason I like to talk to these, I mean, it gives you a physical look at things. Um, this very first map, let me see if I can get this full screen here for you.
Yeah, our folks, they do love their maps, and we do too. And I
Oh,
can't really
I'm phasing out on you here. I might have too many things open. Let me close this and
Try it again here.
yeah. Yeah, it's telling me to restart. I'm going to see if I can wait and see if it'll respond. Um, but if you can see that in the background at all, it's kind of
Yeah.
light on my screen. Oh, there it goes. I'll see if I can. There we go. We'll see if this will load up for you, and I'll just be able to kind of flip through these. And it's not cooperating, but at least with this first map, what you can see is the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay and a portion of the Chesapeake Bay, all the way up to the Potomac River where it's up in the upper left-hand corner. And then you've got the Rappahannock, the York, the James. And these are all navigable by not necessarily shallow draft vessels, but the channels are deep enough in all those rivers that you can go way inland and later on, in 1776, Roebuck will all go all the way up to um, Stafford County,
Hmm.
up the Potomac. So, and Roebuck's a 44 gun, frigate. So, this tells me that they understand that the area is vulnerable to naval operations. And when you get down here into, uh, there you go, Norfolk. Yes, I'm running slow for some reason. I don't know why. Now we're asking crazy. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got it good on our end.
Okay, you're good. All right. So, yeah, so you can see how important that is. Now, looking inside this area down here at Norfolk and Princess Anne counties, you see Norfolk and Virginia Beach today. All of this, it's Chesapeake, Norfolk, Portsmouth. That would have all been Norfolk and Princess Anne counties in 1776. And what you see here is a modern day Census Bureau map, and it shows that linkage with North Carolina. And the reason I like this is because it tells you that in 1775, there were linkages between these northeast counties of North Carolina and the rest of the Tidewater area. And so the goods and services didn't necessarily flow out through the Outer Banks
Hmm.
here. They flowed north, and that's why Great Bridge and Norfolk become so important. And these, if you look at North Carolina during this time, these are some of the smaller counties, but they're the most densely populated and some of the most productive in terms of raw material and resources, in particular for things like tar and shingles coming out of the Great Dismal Swamp. Those things are very, very important. The pitch for on ropes on sailing vessels, to coat them and protect them. That pine tar, all those things are very, very important. But this does show that linkage, and it's a modern day look at it.
And
So
this is the area too where these North Carolinians are coming from to Woodford's aid on December 9th and December 10th. So, this is also where he's getting that support from.
Absolutely. So, at Great Bridge, there's about 180 is the number that we generally go with North Carolinians, and they all come from those. They are a combination of volunteers, Minutemen, militiamen from those east counties in North Carolina, and so they show up at Great Bridge. Now, they don't bring much firepower, but they bring
Right.
some cannons, and those cannons, as we talked about, are not functional, but nobody knows that at the time. And that's one of the things that induces Dunmore to attack at Great Bridge. He thinks the cannon are going to knock down his fort. So
I
all
think one of the things that you point out so well is, when we talk about motivations for enlistment, motivations for service, certainly there's some of those altruistic motivations for these North Carolinians, marching towards Great Bridge. But what so is illustrative of this map that I like is there's those economic motivations as well, that these men are, protecting this economic, um, you know, uh, situation between this geographic area between the two colonies, North Carolina and Virginia.
Yeah, so this kind of helps explain why. Well, why does North Carolina send forces?
Yep.
Why does Colonel Howe become the senior man in Norfolk? Why does all that happen? Well, it's because North Carolina has a real interest. They realize that they can't protect that area. That no, those counties. They have to cooperate with Virginia on this, and that Dunmore is a problem, and he has to be dealt with. So I think that's the value of this, and that state line is just an arbitrary political
Yeah.
boundary. It doesn't control, the same people that settled that Tidewater area of Virginia, are the same ones that settled down there in North Carolina. So,
Great map. Yeah.
and then of course this is the one I used previously, and it helps explain the importance of Great Bridge, but it also helps explain why, Norfolk, this port town right here, uh, can easily be cut off if this choke point is controlled. This is isolated, and if you don't have a navy, well, then you can't really hold this. And so that's the part of that conundrum with holding Norfolk. And I think this shows. Again, it's exaggerated. It's additional water, but it shows how important the waterways are in this area of Virginia.
Mm.
The other map, again, that I think I used previously, which is illustrative on this, is the line of communications to Norfolk. If you don't control the water, we can drive from Norfolk to Williamsburg today if the tunnel's not clogged up in an
Yeah.
hour, you know?
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's not far.
Yeah.
Well, if you have to walk or use wagons and you don't control the water, which the Patriots did not, they had no navy. The British fully controlled the water, those British and loyalist vessels. This is the route you have to take. And this is a long line of communications. And by destroying Norfolk right here in the center, you could keep small garrisons at Kemp's Landing and Great Bridge, and you can evacuate back to Suffolk. What you've
Mm.
done is shortened your line of communications back to Williamsburg significantly,
Yeah.
and now you're not subject to being cut off by the British Navy. So I think this is another important point that needs to be brought out when you discuss the burning of Norfolk. Now,
Now,
what did Norfolk look like, right?
yeah,
Yeah, that's the other question. So you were going to propose a question?
I was going to propose a question. If we could go back to that previous slide, in your research, Patrick, and you raise a great point with the not only the line of communication, but really line of supply as well. Um, do you have any evidence in your research of this time period where this is being talked about? Is there consideration? Are we looking from a lens from a modern military perspective and saying, oh yes, this is key because of the line of communication? Does Woodford, do others recognize this as well in real time in late 75, early 76?
Well, I'm certain they do. Because this location right here, approximate location on this map, where the Deep Creek is located, that's where Bachelor's Mill is. That's the Bachelor's Mill Bridge. That's the one that was taken down by the loyalists in Woodford's rear. And so that's he can't get his wagons past that.
Hmm.
That has to be rebuilt. So that's one of the reasons why he doesn't immediately charge across the bridge after, after to follow up on his victory at Great Bridge,
Right.
and make it even more complete than it was. He's cautious because he's looking at logistics. He's looking at those reinforcements. So I think, yeah, absolutely. And then if you're going to supply a force in Norfolk, and Woodford and Howe both agree that it's going to take about 5,000 men to properly garrison this area and hold
Wow.
it. Um, Virginia doesn't have 5,000 men. No,
No.
and they mobilized about 9,000 men when they acted in August. But that's most of those were minute units, and those never actually form. as we talked before, the Culpeper Minutemen are unique in that they formed an entire battalion quickly and went into the field.
Right.
Most districts did not do that. They would field a company or two is all they could field. So by the time you get to Norfolk, what what you find is that 22 companies that are there at Great Bridge on the 12th of December. Now, 11 of those companies fight the Battle of Great Bridge. Now there's 22 there on December 12th. And Woodford will have to leave some of those. One company garrisons Kemp's Landing. He leaves um, Thomas Marshall, Major Thomas Marshall from the Culpeper Minute Battalion at Great Bridge with three companies, and they're guarding prisoners and securing that area. So that's four companies he's down. So now he's down to 18 companies available to employ in Norfolk. Now he'll get an additional six companies by the 1st of January. Four of those will come from, I believe, the Southampton district, and two of them from the Amelia district, and those are minute companies.
Yeah.
So he probably never exceed 1,500 men in Norfolk during the entire Patriot occupation.
Which, when we start talking about the number of companies, that sounds like Woodford would have, when you have 18 companies, 22 companies, that sounds like that should be, a sufficient force in which to occupy uh, this location. But as you were transitioning to your next slide, what is Norfolk like at this time? Is that sufficient? And as you mentioned earlier, that they're estimating the needs of 5,000, which clearly they don't have.
Yeah,
So what is
yes.
Norfolk like at this time?
So this is the best period map that I can find, and it's of course not oriented in a way that you would find a map oriented today. But this what this does is it shows that area of Norfolk by the waterfront
Mm,
that would have actually been defended because this is a 1781 map, and you see there are now defenses around here.
right.
Um, this was drawn uh, during the British occupation of of the area of Norfolk and Princess Anne counties by Benedict Arnold's force. So this was probably drawn in late January or early February, excuse me, of 1781. And this is available at the Library of Congress. This is where I got it. So it's not it's in the map section, but I just blew this little section up, and it shows what had been um, the part of Norfolk that actually would have been occupied. So when you try to look at that today in terms of what did it look like, most of what you see here, all this water and swamp area, has all been filled.
Mm.
This is one of the reasons why you have flooding in Norfolk. But the actual part that was defended back at that time would have been right in here, from what I can tell. This is probably circa War of 1812 map of Norfolk, as you can see, and it's hand drawn. Um, but the Norfolk has expanded. It's been rebuilt by
You
this
know,
point.
I want to pause you there for a second because I think this is another really great map. One of the things we talked about earlier, and you've mentioned it, of the necessity of 5,000 men to occupy and control this area. Looking at this map, what are the tactical and strategic challenges of being able to hold this? Why are so many men necessary? Is this a place that can be strategically and tactically controlled? Or if not, is that playing into the ultimate decision to burn it?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, Dan. So what you see, this channel is to that goes out to the left, the north and west. This is the Elizabeth River that will run out into the Hampton Roads property. And if you followed that up north off of this map, you would go past what's now the Norfolk Naval Base, where all the ships and the carriers are parked. You
Right.
know, uh, if you follow this on down a little further south, this would be where the Norfolk Naval Shipyard is located over here in Portsmouth. This is where the Norfolk Naval Hospital is, and this is what Dunmore would have, had a little foothold here in February through May of '76 before he left. And of course, this is the eastern branch of the Elizabeth River it runs out to what's now Kempsville or Kemp's Landing in Virginia Beach today. Then it was part of Princess Anne County. And this is the southern branch that goes on down would have gone down to Great Bridge. So it's a it's a critical point. And as you can see, you can land anywhere, right? If you have an amphibious force. So Woodford and his team are sitting here, right in the center of this map, and they're like, well, we have to be on watch 24 hours a day when we're occupying Norfolk because we don't know. They have 100 vessels out here, right?
Yeah.
We don't know where they might try to land and establish a foothold and attack us. So um, this is one of the challenges that Woodford faces in December is like we they could land up here, march in behind us. You see, there's a road there, so obviously there was some sort of a road there at the time of the Revolution. They can come in behind us. I mean, that's what happens to the Patriots at Long Island, right?
Yeah.
They don't hold all the roads, and you can get in behind somebody with an army, you know. And so, if the British do decide to reinforce, this is just really not a very good place to be, if somebody's trying to envelop you or cut you off. And I think that's the real issue here, is that nobody wants to destroy a city, but our when it comes to can you hold that city and what military value is it? I mean, you only need to flip on the TV today and see what happens in urban warfare. It's
Right.
not a pretty picture, and with many examples over history of that, trying to hold cities or just defend them, they get destroyed. Um,
Well, and I think, one of the things that, your explanation brings to bear, and I think the answer is probably pretty obvious, but it worth mentioning for a moment is I would assume that, Woodford on the ground really lacks intelligence as to where a potential landing may occur. What's the situation for Woodford at making these decisions? Is there any sort of intelligence that's coming into headquarters, for the Patriots at this point to intimate where the next movement or action may come from?
there really isn't any type of good intelligence. Now, they do have coastal watch systems. So when Liverpool comes into the Chesapeake Bay, they do have folks out closer to the bay and say, hey, there's a British warship coming in. They don't know exactly what it is, right? They give a general description. They try to count the number of ports and guns that it might have on it, So, but yeah, and there's intelligence coming from if you read the correspondence, you'll find there's intelligence saying that, well, Roebuck left. Um, I think it was in Halifax initially, stopped by New York, and then came down to Virginia. But those are all things we know today from reading the correspondence, right?
Yeah.
And that information wasn't necessarily known at the time. And then I have another one, and this is a 1781 map. This is Johann Ewald's map in his book, The American War, showing what was left of Norfolk in 1781. And as again, you see this area, this small area on his hand-drawn map. In the center, he has a cross. That would be St. Paul's Church, the Episcopal Church. It was burned as well during the destruction of the city, but the brick walls remained, and it's surrounded by a brick wall, a church compound, if you will, and it's still there today. And so this was used as a hospital and a strong point defense when in 1781 the British sent a detachment from Portsmouth over to Norfolk. So this is kind of important because it's the only structure to survive.
Hmm.
And you have in your background behind you the different uh, one of the depictions of what Norfolk would have looked like. But the only brick structure that we know, other than a few chimneys and fireplaces that are depicted in that picture, was St. Paul's Church. So I would invite everyone that's interested. We're going to have a commemoration of the 250th commemoration of the destruction of Norfolk on the 31st of January at St. Paul's Church. And that'll be at 11 a.m. It's a Saturday. And our principal guest speaker there, this is going to be an SAR, DAR, CAR. So sons, daughters, and children of the American
Hmm.
Revolution are all sponsoring this. And it's our guest speaker is going to be Reverend Davis, who was the minister of St. Paul's Church about this time and then had ties to the Washington and his family. So it should be a pretty interesting presentation by Reverend Davis, who we just happened to find, and he said he'd be available to do it. So coming back to us from the 18th century, uh, and we'll be kind of inspired by his words, I'm sure. But yeah, so this is Ewald. So you can see probably 30 or 40 structures had been rebuilt by 1781 after the entire city was burned. So I think this is worth looking at because this is one of the few surviving maps we have from that period.
So so far in tonight's program, we've kind of talked about the lead up to the burning, post battle of Great Bridge, arrival of reinforcements for both the Patriots and Dunmore. We've looked at some of the geography of the area, the region. We've really covered that the surrounding periphery of the moment, and I think that the next part that we should really delve into as our program comes to an end is the day of the burning itself. Can you walk us through, those events that day, some of the accounts that you've come across, and the results of that moment, if it were that kind of ripple through the revolution?
So you get a sense that all those things that led up to it, there's just kind of a culmination on the day of the event, at least when the burning starts on the first. Um, Howe and Woodford have both denied the British the opportunity to come ashore and get fresh water, supplies, firewood. So the conditions have just gradually deteriorated on that out there on those ships. The Patriot riflemen have taken a few pot shots. There is a vessel with salt um, moored just off the piers, and the Patriots have been trying to offload the salt from that, but the British will not let them. It's very, very contentious. So all this comes to a head in a culmination when they say that the ships have springs on their cables, and what that does is it allows the cannons to not break the anchor cables, when they fire. So this is what conditions that exist, and they begin that barrage.
Hmm.
Uh, it goes on for a number of hours. It starts about 3 in the afternoon from what we can the accounts we have, and it will continue until well after dark. Some say even after midnight. There's a couple lulls in there, but during this time and after the hours of darkness is when the citizens that were still in the town say that the troops came out with their firebrands, their torches, and started torching buildings. They went in and started torching buildings after rummaging through and collecting whatever they want and took out of them. So this is how it kind of deteriorated. And again, it's difficult to get the timing of some of those things down because remember, these statements were written almost 2 years later.
Right.
Some of them are pretty specific and others are a little more general. But th this destruction went on for several days. So we do know, based on the accounts of one of the minute units that arrived, two companies from the Amelia district. They arrived right about the time that the bombardment started. So couldn't you imagine being a Minuteman?
Yeah.
One of these guys were covering a bridge further to the west over think on the James River. I can't remember exactly where it was, but he had done duty there for a month or two, and then they were ordered to come in and reinforce at Norfolk. So they marched over. It's January. It's end of December, 1st of
Yeah.
January. You're marching over there. You get probably check in at Great Bridge with Major Marshall, and then he orders you on up to Norfolk, and you walk into town just as the artillery barrage is beginning. So those were two of the six companies that reinforced minute companies that reinforced both the Second North Carolina, the Second Virginia, and elements of the Culpeper Minute Battalion that were there in Norfolk. So yeah, so kind of interesting that was one of the events that was recorded. And again, those are from the pension statements of the soldiers themselves. And I actually found that one because I got an inquiry from a descendant who wanted to know if their descendant was at Great Bridge because he
Hmm.
mentions Great Bridge. I said, "Oh no, he was. We know who he is. He was in that minute company." And I went back and read the what he wrote. He said, "Yeah, we were going into town just as the barrage started."
And and for their experience for the last several weeks, guarding these bridges in the back country, if you will, of the Tidewater area, that service is nothing in comparison to this massive barrage. The Roebuck itself, I think, had what 48 guns or something like that on it.
Yeah, so
So,
Roebuck's not there. Liverpool is the biggest
or
one at this
Liverpool,
point.
excuse me.
Roebuck
Yes,
comes in February,
that's
so
right.
this difficult to track all these ships because
Yeah,
they're pesky little things. They move all over the place, and that's what gives the British Navy that great capability. Is they've got a lot of capacity, and the captains are really good. They can go where they want to when they want to, and as long as the water's deep enough, they're
right.
they're going to go there. So
But
yeah.
suffice it to say, for these minute companies, this is you know, a whole new level of introduction to warfare, marching into Norfolk under these conditions.
I'm sure that maybe only a handful of men that were there in Norfolk that day had ever experienced cannon fire. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this is first time for all these guys. Because there's a few French and Indian War veterans. Like Woodford himself, Scott. Uh, there's a few of those guys out there. How they would have probably had some experience with that, but most of the men were younger. They'd never seen anything like that.
And that leads to another part of this conversation. I think there comes to be this mythology or misnomer that these minute companies and militia throughout the war on the Patriot side tend to break very easily. What are the performance of these companies in Norfolk? Are they standing there? Are they holding their posts and positions during the bombardment? Are they how do they equip themselves during this moment?
So the guard that are out on the docks, and the guard are out there to prevent the British landing parties from coming ashore and gaining supplies out of the warehouses. So that's why they're out there. And that's one reason why the warehouses, get torched fairly quickly, is that they don't want those landing parties. And the British do send landing parties ashore, but they are repulsed, and it's not clear how much damage, was actually done to those
Mhm.
parties. But there are casualties. Um, I don't think they're probably real significant, but there are some casualties involved. Um, so those landing parties actually are turned back, and at this point, then that's when the Patriots will start burning things. So you can imagine it would be a very kind of intense environment for everybody. You're under cannon fire. They drive you back from your posts. There's actually guard houses out on the docks, and those
Mhm.
are some of the initial targets of the gunners, on the ships, is to destroy those guard houses because they can see them. I mean, they're not more than 300, 400, 500 yards away, from the waterfront there. So it's very evident what's going on. And that's one of the things that the British don't like is, you got patriots out there with, you know, with weapons changing guard in front of them, and that's seen as a very disgraceful thing for the British Navy, the proud British Navy that controls the seas. So, yeah, that's the kind of the chaos that goes on, and exactly what types of orders are given for the destruction and the burning. That's all very unclear, but it clearly goes on. And so,
Right.
how do these units hold up? They probably most of them hunker down, under that intense fire. The fire will take place not only on the 1st, but on subsequent days. I believe the 8th and the 21st. And on the 21st of January, there are at least three casualties. And I believe a third man or fourth man may have lost his arm in the cannonades
Mm,
on the 21st. So this isn't just a one-time event. But by that time, two-thirds of the city is burned, and it actually opens up the fields of fire for the British gunners. Once
mm,
a large number of buildings are actually consumed by fire. So in these
yeah.
subsequent assaults, they're actually able to target a little better than initially when the buildings kind of block their view. So how did they hold up? I think they held up well, but I think the men were frustrated. They didn't want to be there. It's cold. That long chain of supply, they're probably not getting the kind of food and you know, Woodford at Great Bridge wrote, "Hey, it'd be nice if you get these guys a second blanket,
Oh,
right?"
yeah.
So they got one blanket to cover themselves up at night. We know there's snow in December, right about Christmas time, right before Christmas. We know there's a pretty cold blizzard that blows through and it snows. And having been down at Great Bridge after it snowed here just this year,
Yes.
it can be quite miserable. That wet, sloppy snow. I mean, you usually don't get that snow that sticks for days and weeks around here. You usually get kind of a wet, sloppy snow, and and then it freezes at night again, and it's just nasty. It's kind of nasty weather. So that's what the men were experiencing ashore, and I'm sure they had had enough of it. There's some indications that there were some men that took it upon themselves to leave, but it doesn't look like there was a large number of deserters. You'll see, well, different places, but on both sides, it doesn't appear that there's large numbers. But whenever there was a deserter, now that's another information piece, right?
Yeah.
For the other side to take advantage of, and so that usually gets announced pretty significantly. But from an overall perspective, I think what the Patriots were able to do with blaming the burning of Norfolk on Dunmore. I mean, it continues in textbooks today that a lot of people, still believe that same story, you know. So it's probably one of the most effective information operations, military information operations in the history of warfare. And it's been perpetuated,
Yeah.
that Dunmore is responsible. And so did they set him up? Did they
Mm,
wait? And then Woodford said, okay, now it's time. Let's burn it. We don't really know. But what we do know is that that story has been perpetuated for years. We're now at 250 years. We know the investigation was done in 1777. We know from that investigation that 96% of the buildings that were in Norfolk were destroyed by Patriot actions. It's very clear when you read the report.
if anything, in the early years of the war, the Americans were really good at propaganda, and you know, this ranks right up there with the Boston Massacre, and how we were able to utilize the outcome of the Boston Massacre to really grow and groundswell support for the Patriot cause. And you're 100% right here with the ability to blame Dunmore and utilize this as another British atrocity and reasoning for supporting the American cause, the Patriot cause. So before we let you go tonight, Patrick, can you spend a couple moments talking about the fallout, or how this plays out, this news of the burning of Norfolk plays out throughout the rest of the colony of Virginia or the other colonies, or even, British strategy moving forward in this area of the colonies.
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions in there, but from a strategic perspective, Dunmore continues to ask for reinforcements. He's like, "Hey, give me a couple regiments. I can hold this place. Just give me something to work with." Never give him anything.
Mm.
The British Navy shows up. Roebuck with Hammond will come back down in May and say, you're about to get cut off over here at Tucker's Point in Portsmouth. You need to get out of here. They're mounting cannon now. They're getting serious. They're getting some cannon along the Elizabeth River, and we may not be able to get you out of here. And so that's when they evacuate up to Gwen's Island. And so when they go up to Gwen's Island, again, the Patriots do get cannon, and they are able to drive those warships away from the coast, from the initial supporting positions. And the numbers are so weak now at this point in Dunmore's force, since he hasn't been reinforced. He's been able to bring in some more freed Africans that leave their plantations. He's been able to get some loyalist militia, but disease breaks out. It broke
Mm.
out before he left Portsmouth. So those bad conditions on those ships now lead to bigger problems for him from a medical perspective. Smallpox and other diseases, probably typhus or just about anything else that could infect people, kills a lot of his people. They think there may be up to 500 graves on Gwen's Island.
Wow.
It's horrible what happens up there, and so the British Navy at this point says, "Hey, we can't protect you anymore." Roebuck and Hammond say, "It's the gig is up, right? You got to leave. You got to leave Virginia." And so Dunmore won't leave his loyalists to the hands of the Patriots. So they're able to get fresh water and then move north. Um, Roebuck, as you indicated, will go back to New York. A portion of the folks that leave will go with the Roebuck.
Mm.
Dunmore himself will go up to New York. Some of those folks will then head back to England, to Great Britain, and some will go down to St. Augustine. So they go three different directions when they actually evacuate Virginia. So that strategic significance is that Virginia is free of colonial forces, British colonial governance. And of course, all this occurs about the same time as the Declaration of Independence is declared. Virginia's first Commonwealth is established. And then now Virginia can recruit to that 1776 structure for Washington's army of those 15 regiments. Now, again, they never fill out completely, but the
Right.
idea is we need a permanent 3-year army. And so most of those Virginia regiments initially are 2 years, 2-year enlistments. But that's what now allows Washington some flexibility in his force employment. So the strategic significance is that there's no British forces in Virginia. Virginia can send her people and her resources. Remember, this is the largest colony, the most productive colony of the 13.
Mm.
About 20% of the colonists in 1775 live in Virginia. So Virginia and Massachusetts provide both the physical and the intellectual leadership for the Continental Army. And so with Virginia doesn't get to work that piece, then there isn't independence, you know, there isn't a United States of America as we know it today. None of this would happen. So I think the events that occur both from the destruction of Norfolk, of course, starting with Great Bridge, the destruction of Norfolk, and then on to the evacuations of those British forces and their decision. It's a decision. You get choices, from a strategic perspective of where to employ your forces. And the British government chose not to employ them in Virginia. And I think that was a huge mistake because if they had kept
Yeah.
Virginia out of the game by who knows how many regiments it would have taken, but certainly those, well, I think 5 regiments went to Charleston, and then eventually have to join into the attack on New York in August. If those regiments had come to Virginia instead of Charleston, very different game, I think. but that's all speculative. There's a lot of places the revolution could have gone wrong, but for the Patriots at least, it went right with what happened in Virginia. And unfortunately, Norfolk was sacrificed to be able to do that. It's a sad part of the story.
Well, what a great program this evening. We were so happy to have you come back, Patrick, and talk to us tonight about this moment 250 years ago, the events leading up to the burning of Norfolk and the fallout thereof, both the positive and negative of the burning itself. For those of you that caught it earlier in the program, as Patrick mentioned, there's going to be a 250th anniversary event taking place on January 31st, and we'll make sure to share that information on our social media and blog for those of you that are interested in joining. I'm sure Patrick will be there as well. And take a moment to pick his brain, ask him some more questions about this pivotal time period of January 1776. So thank you again, Patrick, for joining us this evening. And for all of you that joined in as well, we hope to see you again on another installment of Emerging Revolutionary Wars, Rev War Revelries. Until next time, everyone, take care, and thanks again for watching.
Thank you, Dan.